Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land with ILTV, have no worries. It's time for our new show this week in Israel, where we'll give you the scoop on everything you need to know about the last 7 days right from Tel Aviv. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, here to keep you informed. Despite Poland's promise to work with Israel to fix its controversial Holocaust bill, the Polish Senate has just voted and approved the legislation in its current form with massive support. It now only needs to be signed by Poland's president to become a law, who has already voiced his support for it. And as you might imagine, Israel is outraged. This bill has erupted a wave of outrage from Israel and Jewish organizations all over the world. As written, it would criminalize anyone who uses the term Polish death camp to refer to Nazi concentration camps within Poland, including the infamous Auschwitz. Poland says this is merely a necessary means to fight slander against their country, but many experts argue that it dangerously rewrites an incredibly dark chapter in human history and purposely clouds the role many Polish people willingly played in helping execute Hitler's horrific final solution in Poland.
Mieliśmy spotkanie kierownictwa partii. Rozmawialiśmy długo o tej sytuacji, którą jesteśmy, nie ukrywam, bardzo zasmuceni, zaskoczeni, również zdziwieni, że nasza walka o prawdę, o godność Polaków jest tak interpretowana i tak odbierana.
Poland's prime minister had previously promised to work with Prime Minister Netanyahu on rewriting the future drafts of the bill. But clearly that has very much not happened. Israeli lawmakers are now considering passing new Israeli laws in response to this Polish legislation. The first would grant immediate legal defense to anyone prosecuted under the incoming law. And the second would assign harsher punishments against Holocaust deniers or the act of those who collaborated with the Nazis during the Holocaust. President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have just met face-to-face at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Now, this is one of the world's biggest gatherings of international leaders in business and industry. But the money talk was overshadowed a bit by the more pressing topic of Middle East peace. ILTV's Aaron Porras has more on the story. So, Aaron, what were some of the highlights?
Well, I think the major highlight that's been covered on, practically across the world is that President Donald Trump essentially reneged on his December 6th decision to allow Israel and the Palestinians to split Jerusalem how they see fit in whatever future negotiations there may be. Whereas over this past weekend in Davos, he said emphatically it's off the table.
Okay, so I mean, this is clearly going to affect Middle East peace, but in what way do you think?
It's hard to tell. It's a pretty controversial statement, not only because it goes against what he himself said earlier, but also because even today we're not sure whether or not to take him at his word or other people within his administration. Because while he's in Davos saying Jerusalem is off the table, you have United States Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, at the UN saying that the United States, quote, remains fully prepared and eager to pursue peace. We have done nothing to prejudge the final borders of Jerusalem, and we've done nothing to alter the status of the holy sites, and we remain committed to the possibility of potential for two states if agreed to by all parties. So it's hard to even kind of know where to put your attention.
All right, well, let's check out your report.
The American president took the opportunity to double down on last year's controversial Jerusalem decision, saying that Jerusalem was officially off the table in future peace talks with the Palestinians.
When they disrespected us a week ago by not allowing our great vice president to see them, and we give them hundreds of millions of dollars in aid and support, tremendous numbers that nobody understands. That money is on the table, and that money is not going to them unless they sit down and negotiate peace. Because I can tell you that Israel does want to make peace, and they're going to have to want to make peace too, or we're going to have nothing to do with it any longer.
Prime Minister Netanyahu has hailed this administration as a new era in American-Israeli relations, but Palestinians, however, say Trump's Jerusalem decision, along with his threats to continue slashing all financial aid to the Palestinians, is not only dangerous, but also a death strike to the decades-long peace process altogether.
The insistence of President Trump saying that Jerusalem is off the negotiating table translates into that peace is off the negotiating table. What Palestinians and Israelis need, they need a meaningful peace process that would lead to the two-state solution, the state of Palestine, with East Jerusalem as its capital, to live side by side in peace and security with the state of Israel on the 1967 lines. This is what's needed, and everything else is throwing Palestinians and Israelis deeper and deeper into the cycle of violence and counter-violence.
But even Europe's top rabbi has joined the international chorus now of those condemning Trump for cutting nearly half of its aid to the Palestinians. Like so many others, he warns that economic pressure, especially on a group classified as refugees, will possibly turn desperate times into desperate measures.
Prime Minister Netanyahu has just met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow to discuss the looming threat of Iran in the region. Iranian forces have become increasingly entrenched in southern Syria, filling the power vacuum left by the Islamic State. And now Netanyahu is warning Putin that Israel will not hesitate to act in order to prevent further Iranian footholds. The two world leaders toured Moscow's Jewish Museum and Tolerance Center, marking the 75th anniversary of the rebellion in the Sobibor concentration camp. For Netanyahu, it was a fitting place to draw historical parallels to the current Iranian threat mounting on Israel's border.
שהלקח העיקרי של עליית הנאצים ואחר כך תבוסת הנאצים זה שצריך לעמוד מול אידיאולוגיות רצחניות בזמן ובעוצמה. זו המשימה שלנו גם היום. ועל כך אני רוצה לדבר איתך על אזורנו, על המאמצים המשותפים שלנו.
The IDF claims to have struck military shipments from Iran to the terror group Hezbollah roughly 100 times last year, often in southern Lebanon and southern Syria. This has sometimes placed Israel at odds with Moscow ever since Putin aligned himself with Syria back in 2015, aiding President Assad's troops during the bloody civil war. Israel's defense minister has warned Iranian weapons could turn Lebanon into one big missile factory right on Israel's front door. But the army has already demonstrated in the past that with or without Putin's permission, Israel will take every possible measure to avoid this nightmarish possibility.
Now, following the Trump administration's controversial decision to slash nearly half of its aid to the UN's Agency for Palestinian Refugees, the United Nations warns that Gaza may be nearing a fatal total systems crash. An emergency meeting of international donors is now gathering to address the crisis, and Israel will offer a $1 billion plan to help Gaza, one that would be funded completely overseas.
كانت خدمات الأونروا بالبداية كتير منيحة. كانوا يعني يعطونا أعاشة، يعطونا يحكمونا منيح، يعطونا أدوية، يدخلونا مستشفى، كانت الطبابة كتير منيحة. بس هلا يعني بهال يعني انقطاع الدول المانحة عن الفلسطينية، هلا يعني وضعنا احنا كمان بالمرة بالمخيمات.
International leaders have warned the United States that the aid cuts to UNRWA may have deadly consequences for millions of Palestinian refugees worldwide, including those in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Gaza. Yesterday, aid workers, doctors, and teachers boycotted throughout the Strip amidst growing tensions in the wake of the aid deficit.
And where what is at stake is the access, as I said, of 500,000 boys and girls to education at a very time when everybody is concerned about further risks of radicalization in the Middle East.
Foreign nations have recommitted new dollars to help fill the gap, but the United Nations envoy in Gaza warns that at this rate it may be too little too late. Israel is proposing today a plan to completely overhaul Gaza's infrastructure and reverse the humanitarian crisis. The pitch includes ambitious projects like new desalination plants, electric lines, and a completely new gas pipeline, which is why the cost of the proposal is roughly $1 billion. Israel has offered its first-hand know-how of the territory as well as its expertise in technology to help bring this project to life, but says it will not finance any of it, leaving the funding purely in the hands of overseas donors.
All right, now as we've seen in Gaza, Palestinian unrest against the United States has soared to a fever pitch in the West Bank as well. The budget cuts to UNRWA on top of Trump's bombshell Jerusalem decision have stoked rage to a near unprecedented high. Well, now a group of Palestinian protesters has just invaded a meeting in Bethlehem organized by the United States Consulate, bringing the gathering to a grinding halt. ILTV's Brett Allen Smith is here with the story. Brett, thanks for joining us. You're here from Jerusalem as well.
Glad to be here. Well, first of all, what I'd say about this is that it kind of looks like the nightmare scenario we're kind of all worried about, which is that anger against President Trump from the Palestinians could be spilling onto not just American efforts and agencies in the West Bank, but also just American presence and people in general. I mean, tourists, activists, you name it.
Sure.
And that's kind of what we're all really worried about happening out of this.
I see. So now I understand that there were Americans also present at this meeting. Did it spread to violence, or was it just a protest?
Look, I've seen the video footage, and you'll see it shortly in the report. But what I'd say is that, you know, I think it was more just kind of a shock to have this kind of more ordinary, maybe even mundane business gathering, which was hosted by the U.S. consulate, bombarded by what then became a political event. So, you know, the American lecturer there, he was escorted out. He's fine, totally safe, everyone's safe. But really, it's that atmosphere of, do Americans and are Americans going to feel safe in the West Bank that's really at stake here, as you'll see now in the report.
The meeting, coordinated by the American consulate in Jerusalem, was originally intended as a workshop for Palestinian marketing groups, but it soon became the scene of a tense political standoff.
اليوم في اجتماع كان في الغرفة التجارية للأمريكان، واحنا هاي خطوة احتجاجية بالسياسة الأمريكية في المنطقة لسياسة نقل السفارة الأمريكية للقدس. سنبقى الشعب الفلسطيني عاصمته الأبدية.
The American lecturer quickly fled when the small mob's intention became clear. Though escorted by consular personnel and Palestinian security guards, his car was slightly damaged during the escape. This act demonstrates the mounting unwillingness of Palestinians to trust the United States at all in the wake of controversial shifts in U.S. foreign policy spearheaded by U.S. President Donald Trump. International leaders have warned that Trump's decisions regarding Israel and the Palestinians may spiral the already tense region into further violence. Indeed, the winds of violence certainly seem stronger than ever.
اليوم الشعب الفلسطيني أراد أن يحاكمهم بطريقته وعلى طريقته من أجل أن يوصل رسالة للعالم أن لا قرارات ترامب ولا قرارات بنس ولا قرارات أمريكا سوف تغير من وضع القدس عاصمة دولة فلسطين.
All right, employees of the UN's Refugee Agency for Palestinians in Gaza have just launched an all-out strike, protesting the U.S.'s decision to slash nearly half of its funding to the aid group. The boycott includes Gazan teachers, doctors, social service providers, and aid workers, and they're all urging the United States to consider the humanitarian crisis above politics. Joining me now is ILTV's Aaron Porras with more on this story.
Natasha, yeah, as you said, thousands of aid workers from UNRWA are now protesting in the streets today. They're fighting against what they view as an existential threat both to their organization and to the Palestinian people. And to be honest, no matter what happens following cuts or following the possibility of a dissolvement of UNRWA, it would certainly mean trouble both for the Palestinian people under UNRWA's care and countries that host UNRWA like Jordan and Lebanon.
Now, what do the people of UNRWA want other than the money, of course?
So the money ties into everything. They want the money in order to continue the status quo of UNRWA operations. They want to keep doing what they've been doing, which they've been doing for 70 years. Now, the United States, on the other hand, is saying, you know, you're perpetuating the conflict more than you're helping to solve it, and so put our money where we want you to put it or say goodbye to it.
All right, well, let's check out your report.
نحكي عن حق اللاجئين وحقنا في العودة لن نتنازل عن هذا الحق مهما مرت السنين ومهما مرت الأيام سيبقى حقنا في العودة إلى أراضينا المحتلة مهما كان ومهما حدث لنا للإنوروا ووكالة الأمم المتحدة حق علينا في أن توفر لنا التعليم والصحة.
The White House first announced the massive cuts earlier this month amidst international outrage, even from several Israeli politicians who also say pressure could turn spillover into a dangerous security threat. Though the White House denies the decision is meant to collectively punish the Palestinians for refusing to negotiate with the United States on Mideast peace in the wake of Trump's Jerusalem decision, President Trump himself seemed to contradict those words just last week. At a meeting with Israeli Prime Minister, he told reporters that, quote, that money is on the table and that money is not going to them unless they sit down and negotiate peace, end quote. Meanwhile, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas is currently in Jordan, meeting with King Abdullah II. The growing anxiety in Gaza is surely on both of their minds, as well as figuring out a new strategy for the Palestinians moving forward.
Relations between Israel and the Palestinians have been at a grim standstill, but it looks like there's an upcoming meeting on the horizon for the first time since Trump's bombshell Jerusalem speech. The topic on hand is money, since that tends to be what always brings the Israeli finance minister and the Palestinian prime minister together. Finance Minister Kahlon will host PA Prime Minister Hamdallah next week in Jerusalem to discuss economic cooperation. The two actually met back in October and have a reportedly very warm personal relationship. The elephant in the room of peace negotiations is likely to come up, though. America's peace envoy Jason Greenblatt has urged Kahlon to stress the importance of the United States in the peace process. Netanyahu claims Trump's landmark decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and move the American embassy to Jerusalem will ultimately help facilitate Middle East peace. But with PA President Abbas currently in Jordan and the Palestinians refusing to even discuss the matter with the United States, many wonder if peace is further off than ever before. At least it's a bit of a relief to see that Israel and the PA can still talk shop. All right, a leaked recording of the Israeli Prime Minister's wife, Sarah, has ignited a firestorm of controversy, though the tape appears to echo past allegations and lawsuits accusing Sarah Netanyahu of abusing employees at the Prime Minister's residence. The Israeli leader says the tape is nothing short of a full-out media witch hunt that is targeting his entire family. Sarah Netanyahu can be heard on the tape apparently enraged over a gossip column that didn't point out her status as a certified psychologist. Some say this tape confirms years of rumors circulating in Israeli society, which include allegations of the Prime Minister's wife both verbally and even physically assaulting staff. Numerous former employees have filed lawsuits against Sarah Netanyahu along these grounds, with 2 former employees winning against her in 2016. This comes mere weeks after media published an incriminating recording made of the Prime Minister's son Yair, 25 at the time, allegedly during a rowdy night out to strip clubs. That's why Netanyahu says the recordings are merely more of the same media witch hunt.
שאם הייתם מביאים הקלטה של אישה אחרת, או של משפחה אחרת, לתקשורת, התקשורת הייתה אומרת, עזוב, אנחנו לא מפרסמים את זה, זה פרטי. אבל כשמדובר במשפחה שלי, ברעייתי, בילדיי, הכל מותר. מתירים את דמם. התקשורת מחבקת את המקליטים והמקליטות הללו, ומציגה אותם כגיבורים גדולים. אבל הם לא גיבורים. והם רומסים זכות בסיסית שיש לכל אדם, הזכות לפרטיות.
Latest polls out of the United States suggest that while Republican support of Israel remains strong, Democratic numbers may be waning, specifically in its frustration of Netanyahu and his right-wing government. But here in Israel, tapes like these sometimes only play like practical jokes. Cruel for some, but for others, not cruel enough. All right, a newborn Syrian refugee has just been airlifted from an Israeli hospital, but this time for a very, very happy reason. Israeli doctors have corrected a serious congenital heart defect, meaning the baby should hopefully live a long and healthy life. The infant was born to Syrian refugees in Cyprus back in December, but just days after his birth, he was flown to Israel for critical treatment. Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs coordinated with the Cyprus Ministry of Health to bring the sick baby over to the country for surgery. And Israeli Interior Minister Aryeh Deri was quick to allow the infant and its father to enter Israel. The Syrian baby was treated at the Sheba Medical Center's Edmund and Lily Safra Children's Hospital, a medical facility that constantly receives patients with some of the most complex health problems all over the world. This little infant is scheduled to return to the Israeli hospital when he is 6 months old to finish the treatment for his condition. Well, with the humanitarian crisis in Gaza quickly approaching disastrous new levels, Israel has approved an emergency shipment of power generators into the Strip to relieve the pressure. Officials say at least 7 hospitals in Gaza have had to shut down because of a lack of fuel, making this shipment of generators a critical life-saving delivery. ILTV's Aaron Porras is here with a report. Now, Aaron, how did Israel come to this decision?
Well, this decision was actually decided by a committee that convened in Brussels recently, and it was joined by
American, Israeli, Palestinian, Egyptian, and European leaders. And this latest decision is just a part of a series of decisions that Israel has stated it's willing to approve, as long as Hamas and other terrorist organizations don't take advantage of it or misuse them.
Right. Now, this is part of the $1 billion plan that Israel announced recently, correct?
That is correct, which, as you know, then means that Israel has created the plan, designed the plan, but they're not willing to fund it. They're looking for foreign funding for this plan. And some of that funding has already actually trickled in, and should the rest of it come in, we're talking about projects involving expanding the electricity grid, sewage treatment, water desalination, and much more.
All right, well, let's check out your report.
The power shortage in Gaza is just one of many decaying infrastructures, and international leaders have just convened to address this mounting crisis, which the United Nations warns is about to verge on a total system collapse, with a special emphasis placed on President Trump's controversial decision to slash nearly half of its funding to the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNRWA. Israel has placed special security restrictions on the generators to ensure that they will not be used for terror. In a separate incident, Israeli security forces have just arrested a 14-year-old Palestinian girl who was visiting Jerusalem without the proper permits. Police told her that they would drop her off near her home in the West Bank, just a few miles north of Israel, but instead they sent her to Gaza, apparently without telling her beforehand. The girl's lawyer says that the girl has never even stepped foot inside the Gaza Strip.
Now, ever wondered what life would be like on Mars? Well, 6 Israeli astronauts are about to find out, and thankfully without having to travel tens of millions of miles to do it. Instead, they'll be living in an incredible new research facility right here in Israel's Negev desert, where the dry surroundings, total isolation, and rocky red terrain will give them a revolutionary experience that is not of this world. Mostly.
This is the first ever extraterrestrial simulation and center of its kind here in the Holy Land. The 6 astronauts will live inside and conduct scientific tests in and around it, simulating what the routine would be like on Mars. Yes, they'll even wear spacesuits the whole time. The simulation will even reenact Mars's rare planetary phenomena, including the radio blackout periods, when the sun interrupts transmissions from Earth to the red planet. The research center is almost fully built now, very close to Mitzpe Ramon, which, as you can see here, definitely has an uncanny Mars-like feel to it. That's also why the 6 astronauts assigned to the project have been dubbed the Ramonauts. But what space mission would be complete without awesome spacesuits? World-renowned Israeli designer Alon Livni, who's done wardrobes for Lady Gaga, Kim Kardashian, and Beyoncé, has dreamed up these awesome sci-fi suits, but they're not just for style. Livni made them alongside scientists at the Israel Space Agency, which means they're fully functional, too.
Israelis like to think that they're the leaders of, well, everything, but here are the top 5 things that they're actually right about. At number 1, welcome to the startup nation. Israel not only has the most startups per capita, the country also has the highest rate of entrepreneurship among women and among people over the age of 55 in the world. It looks like this is where you want to be if you want to live a long and fulfilling life or never retire. Next, at number 2, college degrees. Yes, there are a lot of entrepreneurs in Israel, but not everybody is Mark Zuckerberg. In fact, Israel has the highest ratio of college degrees in regards to its population. Let's not forget some of the universities over here rank among the top in the world. Now at number 3, we have books. It looks like Israelis can't seem to get their noses out of them. Israel has published more books that were translated from other languages than any other country in the world. But don't worry, there's a lot of original writing over here as well. In fact, Israel produces the 2nd highest amount of new books per capita on the planet. Now coming in at number 4, solar energy. Let's just say it gets hot in Israel. So it's no surprise that Israel has the highest percentage of homes in the world that use solar energy for water heating, a whopping 93%. At least there's something positive the burning sun over here can contribute to society. Now finally at number 5, we have vegans. You guessed it, Israel has the most vegans per capita in the world. 5% of the country is vegan and 8% is vegetarian, which means you may want to start changing your diet to fit in. It's certainly more ethical. That's it for this week's Roundup. Tune in next Friday for our next episode of This Week in Israel. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from Tel Aviv.